The 1960s promised peace, love, and flower power. But behind the tie-dye curtain, movie censors were sweating bullets. What looked like harmless reels of film were treated like ticking bombs, seized by police, banned in whole states, and condemned from pulpits. The charge? Daring to show America as it really was. So, here's a question. What happens when the land of the free tries to lock up its own movies? Let's dig into 10 reels so shocking they almost vanished forever. 1. Psycho, 1960. Alfred Hitchcock didn't just make a thriller, he detonated the rulebook. Psycho arrived like a knife to the gut of Hollywood's production code, and the censors didn't know what hit them. Imagine audiences in 1960 walking into a theater expecting another tidy murder mystery, only to be slammed with Janet Leigh Oh's shower scene and Anthony Perkins's unsettling smile. This wasn't cozy drawing room suspense. This was raw, unnerving, and completely new. The outrage came instantly. Kansas banned the film outright unless edits were made, slicing away what they claimed were indecent glimpses in the shower. Critics couldn't stop talking about the sight of a toilet flushing. Yes, that was enough to set off moral alarms because no American film had ever dared show it. Hitch had done the unthinkable. He made the bathroom terrifying. Britain's board clipped out stabbing motions and shots of Norman's mummified mother. Other countries axed the movie entirely. But censorship didn't kill Psycho. It only fed it. Hitchcock financed much of the movie himself after studios balked, shot it with a TV crew to save money, and demanded theaters lock the doors once the movie started. No latecomers. If you didn't make it in before the first reel, tough luck. That gimmick alone created lines around blocks. Word spread fast, and the film grossed more than Ben-Hur's opening run. Then came the legacy. The shrieking violins, the fast edits, the camera closing in on that drain all became part of horror's DNA. Suddenly, every slasher, every jump scare, every motel you've ever side-eyed on a road trip owes its life to Psycho. Hitchcock mailed out cheeky critic handbooks, telling reviewers not to spoil the ending, which only made them angrier. They spoiled it anyway. Audiences still stormed in, desperate to feel the shock themselves. And here's the kicker. Despite all the bans, the panic, the angry headlines, Psycho became one of the most profitable films of the decade. The censors tried to flush it away, but like Norman Bates himself, it never really stayed buried. 2. The Man with the Golden Arm, 1960. By the time the 1960s opened, Otto Preminger's The Man with the Golden Arm was already infamous. The film had premiered in 1955, starring Frank Sinatra as a card dealer struggling with dependency. It had no monsters, no aliens, no wild car chases. Just the gritty reality of an American man facing demons that polite society pretended didn't exist. And that was exactly why it was targeted again in the early 60s. See, when Preminger first tried to release it, the Production Code Office refused to give it their official seal. No seal meant no mainstream theaters. But Preminger, always a maverick, went ahead and released it anyway. By the time it returned to theaters in the early 1960s, local boards across the country dusted off their scissors again. They feared the film's raw honesty would corrupt audiences. Kansas and Maryland slapped bans. Other cities demanded it be cut to ribbons before allowing screenings. Frank Sinatra's performance didn't help calm the storm. Critics hailed it as one of his greatest roles. But the sheer intensity unsettled many. Sinatra looked nothing like the breezy crooner people adored. He looked haunted, twitching, fighting himself in every frame. Audiences weren't used to seeing one of the biggest stars in America stripped of glamour and dropped into a story that felt too close to real life. Preminger refused to soften the blow. He made a statement, both with the film and the re-release, that American movies could and should tackle tough issues head-on. The bans only gave him more attention, turning the picture into a cultural flashpoint. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see what the fuss was about. Could a Hollywood film really go that far? And here's the irony. Every time a censor slammed the door, the film's reputation grew. By the end of its run, The Man with the Golden Arm was not just a movie. It was proof that the old censorship system was cracking. The 60s had barely begun, and already one banned film was daring the rest of Hollywood to follow its lead. 3. Splendor in the Grass, 1961. If you think small-town romance sounds innocent, Splendor in the Grass will prove you wrong. Elia Kazan's drama with Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty looked like a wholesome love story on the surface. Two teenagers in the 1920s Kansas, struggling with family expectations and their growing emotions. But under that polished surface was a raw honesty that American censors in 1961 couldn't stomach. Kansas officials, of all places, hit the brakes hardest. The state's board refused to let it screen unless cuts were made, claiming the story encouraged improper thinking. Imagine that, a movie set in Kansas, filmed about Kansas, banned from Kansas. It was the ultimate irony. The local government feared the film's themes of desire, repression, and mental breakdown would send audiences spiraling. Natalie Wood, playing Deanie, delivered one of the most intense performances of her career. Scenes of her breaking under the pressure of expectations felt too real, too raw. Warren Beatty, in his first film role, embodied the struggle of a young man caught between what society demanded and what he really wanted. Together, their chemistry burned holes through the screen. Censors weren't ready for that level of honesty. Films in the early 60s still lived under the shadow of the production code, where even married couples were often shown sleeping in separate beds. Splendor in the Grass shattered that facade. The result? Outrage, bans, and a media circus. The Catholic Legion of Decency slapped it with a disapproval rating. Small-town theaters refused to show it. Yet everywhere it played uncut, audiences flocked in droves. The story's boldness didn't just stir controversy, it earned respect. Natalie Wood picked up an Academy Award nomination, and William Ing's screenplay actually won the Oscar. Suddenly, the very film that local boards tried to crush was walking the red carpet. What the censors didn't understand was simple. Audiences weren't offended. They were moved. People related to the pressure, the heartbreak, and the collapse of ideals. That's what made the ban look ridiculous in hindsight. Splendor in the Grass wasn't dangerous, it was honest. And that honesty helped push American cinema into a new era, one where hiding behind rules was no longer enough. 4. Lolita 1962. Stanley Kubrick's Lolita was a gamble from the first frame. Based on Vladimir Nabokov's controversial novel, the project looked doomed before the cameras even rolled. Everyone said it couldn't be filmed, too risky, too provocative, too likely to be buried by censors. Kubrick, never one to back down from a dare, went ahead anyway and lit a cultural firestorm. The first challenge was the script. Nabokov himself wrote a draft that stretched nearly 400 pages. Kubrick knew no studio would approve, so he sliced it down, dodging the sharpest edges but refusing to dilute the central obsession. His solution was daring. Hint, imply, suggest, but never fully spell it out. Still, it was enough to terrify boards across America. The Catholic Legion of Decency came down hard, branding it morally objectionable. Ireland banned it outright. France clipped more than 10 minutes. In the United States, Kubrick faced city-by-city battles. Some theaters pulled it after protests. Others demanded edits. Chicago censors went so far as to ban the first ad campaign, which featured only a pair of sunglasses and a lollipop. And yet, controversy sells. Lolita banked over $9 million worldwide, triple its budget. Sue Lyon, only a teenager, became an overnight icon. Those heart-shaped sunglasses appeared on magazine covers, posters, and even novelty merchandise. Critics were divided. Some praised the satire, others scolded the subject matter. Kubrick himself later admitted he would never have attempted the story if modern ratings had existed. What makes Lolita endure is not shock for shock's sake, but its sharp bite at American hypocrisy. Behind the suburban lawns and polite manners, Kubrick showed a world of obsession and rot. Viewers laughed, cringed, and argued, often all at once. That's why the bans didn't work. People wanted to see the movie their leaders told them not to. In the end, Lolita didn't just survive censorship, it turned into a landmark of 60s cinema. Every time pop culture borrows those sunglasses, every time a film pushes past polite limits, Kubrick's bold gamble echoes. 5. Dr. Strangelove 1964. How do you make a comedy out of nuclear war? Stanley Kubrick's answer: you lean into the absurd and then you make it terrifying. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, exploded into theaters in 1964, and almost immediately people tried to shut it down. The Pentagon refused to cooperate. Some southern cities banned it outright. Why? Because it dared to say the quiet part loud. Those in charge of the bombs might not be sane. Kubrick's satire was razor sharp. Peter Sellers played 3 roles, including the unforgettable wheelchair-bound Strangelove, who seemed to slip into fascist salutes mid-sentence. George C. Scott ranted and mugged as a hawkish general, while Slim Pickens rode a nuclear bomb like a rodeo cowboy. For audiences used to flag-waving war movies, this was chaos. It didn't celebrate the military, it mocked it. Officials were not amused. The U.S. Air Force publicly denounced the film. Some critics accused it of being communist propaganda. In the South, where patriotism was treated as gospel, theaters quietly canceled screenings. One Georgia mayor declared it unfit for Americans. The controversy only heightened when word spread that Kubrick had nailed the look of U.S. war rooms without permission. The Pentagon called it fantasy, but insiders admitted it looked suspiciously close to the real thing. Censorship didn't stop the movie, it supercharged it. Audiences packed theaters, eager to laugh at what they feared most. The timing was eerie. Just as the Cuban Missile Crisis still haunted everyone, Kubrick dropped a black comedy that ended with mushroom clouds set to "We'll Meet Again." For some, it was the funniest film of the decade. For others, it was a nightmare dressed as a joke. Here's the irony. The very film some towns banned became a classic, preserved in the Library of Congress and hailed as one of the greatest American movies ever made. The censors tried to silence laughter, but Kubrick proved that sometimes comedy cuts deeper than fear. 6. The Pawnbroker, 1964. When Sidney Lumet dropped The Pawnbroker on American screens, the censorship code didn't just tremble, it cracked. Rod Steiger plays Sol Nazarman, a Holocaust survivor running a pawn shop in Harlem. Haunted by memories, cut off from hope, he moves through the world like a ghost. That alone was heavy enough for 1964, but Lumet went further. He filmed trauma and despair without filters, and for the first time in American cinema, included a brief moment of bare human reality that sent the censors into meltdown. The production code flat out refused approval. They had never allowed such imagery, no matter how fleeting, and this film wasn't about thrills, it was about pain. Lumet and his backers appealed, religious and cultural. Groups stepped in, arguing that the scene wasn't lurid but necessary, that it revealed humiliation and suffering rather than spectacle. To everyone's shock, the appeal succeeded. The Pawnbroker became the first American movie with such a moment to win official approval. But not everywhere. Kansas banned it outright, ignoring the appeals. Protests flared in New York synagogues, where some viewers felt it exploited trauma. Meanwhile, others praised it for refusing to sanitize reality. Quincy Jones provided a restless jazz score, his first major film gig, cut in an 18-hour marathon session that matched Steiger's heartbeat. Shot on location in Harlem for less than $1 million, the film carried a documentary-like grit. Censorship didn't kill it, it amplified it. Critics hailed Steiger's performance as one of the most powerful of the decade. His silent, tear-streaked collapse at the end left audiences shaken, and Lumet's reputation for fearless filmmaking skyrocketed. The movie's battles also paved the way for the collapse of the old code itself. Without The Pawnbroker, there may never have been Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or the explosion of freedom in late 60s cinema. In short, one banned film didn't just survive, it rewrote the rules for everything that came after. 7. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? 1966. By 1966, Hollywood was gasping for air under the dying production code, and then along came Mike Nichols with a Molotov cocktail disguised as a play adaptation. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf didn't just bend the rules, it obliterated them. Starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, it's essentially two couples in one house, tearing each other apart with words sharp enough to draw blood. No monsters, no car crashes, just dialogue so raw that censors panicked. The code board nearly refused approval. Words like hump and screw had never made it to American screens before. The Catholic Legion of Decency stamped it with condemnation. Some theaters refused to screen it at all, terrified of protests. Kansas once again stood out, banning the film unless edits were made. Yet Warner Brothers, sensing the end of the old system, pushed forward anyway. Taylor shocked everyone. She gained weight, aged herself up, and played Martha with a volcanic fury that had nothing glamorous about it. Burton matched her beat for beat, his slurred delivery both menacing and magnetic. Watching them fight was like witnessing a private war. Critics were stunned. This was no tidy studio drama. This was real. The censors' attempts to kill it backfired spectacularly. Audiences packed theaters, lured by whispers that the dialogue was too much for polite company. The result? 13 Oscar nominations, 5 wins, and a permanent hole blown through the code. Without Virginia Woolf, the new MPAA rating system might never have arrived. It wasn't just a movie. It was the sound of Hollywood growing up one fight at a time. 8. The Trip, 1967. Roger Corman wasn't afraid of controversy. He built a career on it. But with The Trip, he dove headfirst into the counterculture and came out with a film that freaked out American authorities. Written by Jack Nicholson and starring Peter Fonda, it was a neon-colored plunge into the world of LSD. The plot was simple. A man takes a mind-expanding journey and finds both terror and beauty. For mainstream America in 1967, that was a bridge too far. The censors pounced. The MPAA didn't yet have its new rating system, so local boards wielded the scissors. Cities across the South and Midwest banned it entirely. Others allowed it only with heavy cuts, slicing out the most colorful sequences. Even television ads were forbidden in some markets. Officials argued the movie would encourage drug use. Fonda and Nicholson suddenly found themselves labeled spokesmen for rebellion, whether they wanted it or not. Corman leaned into the storm. He shot the film with rapid cuts, swirling lights, and experimental visuals. Sets dissolved into abstract shapes. Camera operators strapped lenses to swings and rotating rigs to mimic altered states. The result was chaotic, overwhelming, and for those used to Hollywood polish, almost unbearable. Critics called it irresponsible. Young audiences called it revolutionary. What really terrified censors wasn't just the visuals. It was the timing. America's youth were questioning authority in the streets, and here was a film that seemed to validate their experiments. To local boards and conservative leaders, The Trip looked like gasoline on a fire, but controversy sells, and the film became a cult hit. Drive-ins ran it for months. College campuses traded bootleg reels. Decades later, its influence showed up everywhere, from music videos to art house experiments. The bands couldn't erase it. They only gave it more power. 9. Wild in the Streets, 1968. What if American teenagers took over the government? That's the question Wild in the Streets dared to ask, and it freaked out so many censors that some states wanted it erased entirely. Released in 1968, directed by Barry Shear, this satirical fantasy pushed buttons in ways no one expected. The story follows Max Frost, a rock star who rallies the youth against the establishment. His platform? Lower the voting age to 14 and give power to the generation that actually listens to rock music. Soon, kids are marching in the streets, government leaders are drugged into submission, and Congress is overrun with teenagers. The tone flips between campy comedy and political nightmare, which was exactly what made it dangerous. At the height of real-life campus protests and anti-war marches, many saw the film as subversive propaganda. Local boards in the South banned it immediately. In some small towns, police reportedly warned theaters not to show it. Conservative critics blasted it as an instruction manual for rebellion. For Middle America, the idea of a youth-led coup wasn't entertainment. It was their worst fear projected on the big screen. But controversy fed the fire. Young audiences loved it. The film's soundtrack, packed with psychedelic rock, climbed the charts. Christopher Jones, playing Max Frost, became an instant cult figure. Shelley Winters added star power as a grasping stage mother, while Hal Holbrook played the doomed politician. It wasn't slick Hollywood, it was raw, loud, and designed to provoke. The bands only fueled curiosity. Drive-ins that screened it saw huge crowds. Newspapers ran angry editorials that acted like free advertising. In the end, the film turned a modest budget into a cultural flashpoint. Its mix of satire and chaos influenced later works from A Clockwork Orange to Battle Royale. The irony? What was meant as a warning ended up inspiring. For some young viewers, Wild in the Streets wasn't just a banned movie. It was a glimpse of what might happen if their generation refused to stay quiet. 10. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. When Midnight Cowboy hit screens in 1969, it wasn't just banned in pockets of the country, it carried the infamous X rating. And yet, against every prediction, it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, the only X-rated film in history to do so. The contradictions alone made it unforgettable. Directed by John Schlesinger, the film followed Joe Buck, a wide-eyed Texan played by Jon Voight, who comes to New York chasing dreams of glamour, only to spiral into the city's harsh reality. He meets Ratso Rizzo, Dustin Hoffman at his gritty best, and together they scrape by in the gutters of 42nd Street. The film was unflinching, dirty, and brutally honest about a side of America that few movies dared to show. Censors recoiled. Memphis and Atlanta banned it outright. Smaller towns across the South refused bookings. Blockbuster Video wouldn't even carry it decades later. The X rating, usually reserved for exploitation flicks, slapped a giant warning label on the film. Many expected it to die in obscurity. Instead, the opposite happened. Audiences lined up to see what polite society wanted hidden. They didn't find an exploitative story. They found a heartbreaking friendship. Hoffman's iconic "I'm walkin' here" key line, improvised when a real New York cab nearly hit him, became part of cinema legend. Sylvia Miles earned an Oscar nomination with just 6 minutes of screen time. The film was as real as it gets, shot guerrilla style on actual New York streets, capturing the chaos and energy of a city that chewed up dreamers. Critics couldn't ignore it. The Academy couldn't either. By awarding it Best Picture, Hollywood essentially admitted the old censorship system was dead. Real life had arrived at the movies, messy and uncomfortable, and audiences were ready. The bans failed. The outrage failed. What endured was the raw humanity of two men chasing a dream in a city that gave them nothing. Midnight Cowboy proved that even the most shocking films can find a place in history, not in the shadows, but at the very center of the stage. So, there you have it. 10 films the censors tried to bury, but history refused to forget. From Knives in the Shower to Rock Stars in Congress, these movies show just how scared America once was of its own reflection. Which of these bands shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you love digging into hidden film history, and don't forget to subscribe. After all, the reels they tried to burn are always the ones worth watching.